And we got you for around the first, hour or so of the show, a little less than that's what it looks like at this point. But what have you been up to the last couple of years dealing with this whole COVID 1984
Considerable amount,
scandemic?
actually. Despite the fact that we've had the, I won't even say the word because it gets censored these days, but we've had the health-related things going on all around the world. Well, during that time where live performances and live events were shut down, that was the negative side. But the positive side to me was that it coincided with needing to get a lot of research done and a lot of documentation gathered together for what I want to speak about briefly, because it's relevant to every human being in the world, this. And the bigger picture of what I'm about to tell you, although it kind of sounds as though I'm talking about myself, it's relevant to everybody because it's relevant to what the mass mainstream media, television stations, radio channels, newspapers, magazines, but out there into the world to purposely mislead, brainwash, and psychologically condition people into thinking and doing certain things, and at the same time into not thinking or not doing certain things. So what I've been preoccupied with is something that started, believe it or not, 24 years ago in 1998, when here in England I set out to try and expose a now very famously disgraced British journalist for a now shut down newspaper called the News of the World, which got shut down after it was discovered that it had been hacking the mobile phone messages of murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler. These are all things you listeners can easily Google and find out more about. So that got shut down, but many years earlier, as I say, back in 98, I'd discovered that the News of the World chief investigations journalist, a guy called Mazher Mahmood, also known as the Fake Sheikh, used somewhat dishonest and unethical, to say the least, techniques to manipulate and coerce people to end up doing things they would never normally dream of doing. So he could then create a fabricated story and present it as though certain famous celebrities were actually drug dealers or pimps or other dodgy stuff to make them look bad. So he'd get a story, the newspaper would get viewing figures, the public would be seemingly entertained or mentally occupied by the sordid scandal. And so this went for many years. But I wanted to expose the dodgy manipulation techniques they were using, and it was my intention to go in there when asked to supply girls, escorts, hookers, call them what you will, to ring up a local massage parlour, leave, and not be there when the girls arrived, and thus no crime would have been committed on my part whatsoever. But they would have then run their story as they normally did, along the lines of, we have footage of this magician hypnotist guy arranging for two of his girls to show up for our undercover reporter, and they will present it in a manner where it looked like I was some kind of big-time pimp. Where in truth I'd just rung a local massage parlour and wasn't even there when the girls showed up, so there was no illegal action took place whatsoever, certainly not in England. Unfortunately for me, I did not realise at the time that my publicist at the time was linked in with this journalist, Mazher Mahmood. I knew he'd worked with him in the past. That's how I knew what Mazher Mahmood looked like, even though he kept what he looked like secret. But I unwittingly managed to get to a point where I did trust my publicist at the time, and he'd seeded the idea, looking back on it, to my mood. So they were always one step ahead of me, but I didn't realise that. Now know, because last year in 2021, I came into my possession the knowledge and proof that he paid for a firm of private investigators to use unlawful information gathering techniques, aka phone hacking, to monitor my communications. So they would definitely have known in advance of me meeting with the fake sheikh that I knew who he was, that I consciously thought I was setting everything up with a plan to expose them. But rather than just walking away from it, which any, honest, ethical journalist would have done, if they'd have become aware that the individual me's aim was to expose their dodgy techniques, then obviously somebody with no dodgy techniques would walk away, and that would be the end of it. But rather than do that, they carried on and met with me and acted as though it was a norm, business as usual, so to speak. But it became very clear, looking on things in retrospect, that they had one mission only, and that was to stitch me up as much as they possibly could to ensure that I could never then, or at any time in the future, get the truth out there and make people aware of the dishonest, unethical, and, as we're now aware, with evidence to back it up, wholly illegal techniques that were often used to create these fabricated, sensationalized sting stories, which culminated in 2014 with British pop star Tulisa Kontostavlos apparently being exposed as a drug dealer. But the truth is, this was all nonsense that they'd fabricated and made up. And thankfully, that came out in Tulisa's court case, and the judge identified the fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood as the serial liar and fabricator of engineered nonsense that he always was. Unfortunately, thank God, Tulisa's did not end up getting sent to prison, which is... it's terrible, the number of victims that ended up with prison sentences, or at the very least their life ruined because of false allegations, because of fabricated evidence. As the judge proved in the Tulisa case, Tulisa was totally anti-drugs in real life, but they edited and spliced tapes so that the recording that proved that she was anti-drugs disappeared, and so that Mahmood convinced his driver and colleague Alan Smith to not mention the fact that Tulisa in his earshot had said that she was completely anti-drugs. So that's a bit of an overview of that. But the point is that back in '98, I tried to expose him, but he was step ahead of me all the time. So it was classic entrapment, but I thought I was the one doing the entrapping. The irony of it is they were one step ahead of me because of my publicist links. He was selling me out to them because of the fact they were hacking my phone, so they knew ahead of the game what was going on. So they also knew that I believed, as I firmly did, that I had what they call journalistic license. So they knew they could push me to do something that would be considered illegal, but that I would only do it because I believed that I would be able to prove to the courts, the police, and the Crown Prosecution Service, as I did, that I knew who Mahmood was and that I was operating in the course of putting together a public interest story. So they knew that I'd been kind of pliable, and eventually, after numerous requests from them to get them drugs, counterfeit money, firearms, and all manner of things, which A, I couldn't get, B, I had no intentions of getting, and C, I didn't know where to get from. Suddenly, Mahmood's associates, his so-called bodyguards, the people playing the part of that, suggested to me where to obtain some counterfeit pound coins from. Not only did they suggest where to get them, they told me who to see, how to identify the individual when I went into that particular public house, and how much they would cost. And then conveniently, the fake sheikh playing the part of this businessman, Perry Khan, conveniently again asked for counterfeit coins, asked how much they were, and while it was fresh in my mind, I said £400, which was the price I'd been told by his associate. And lo and behold, I now know that prior to this point in the meeting, my drinks had most likely been drugged with a date rape style drug to make me more suggestible. And indeed, I've got a witness statement from someone who used to work with Mazher Mahmood, stating that he'd witnessed Mahmood drugging people in other stings, and also that he boasted about doing it in his everyday life in the so-called dating arena. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. That sounds like rape, but I'll leave that one there. The point is that I was not in a clear state of mind because I'd been drugged. I was also getting threatened behind the scenes because the bodyguard, and yes, I knew it wasn't a rich Arab sheikh's bodyguard. However, he was menacing and threatening all the same, saying, "Don't F my boss around." And I genuinely kind of believed the veiled threats of violence that were intimated by the way things were veiled, even though I knew Mahmood was a journalist. It was still scary. And I thought, you know what, sod it, in my drugged, copious drinks state, I ended up not thinking straight and thought, well, you know what, at the end of the day, I can prove I'm doing a public interest story. I was recording things myself as evidence. So it'll be fine. If there's no criminal intent here, I'll take the money that they're giving me up front. I'll go to the place they've told me where to go. I'll see the person they've told me how to identify. And I will hand over the money they've given me up front in advance in order to make this happen to the person that they've told me who to see and where to see them. And I will collect these 1,000 allegedly counterfeit pound coins and then take them back to the hotel and give them to Perry Khan, aka the fake sheikh, and they'll have their story. They'll perhaps eventually go with it, because I thought they were going to just do it with the prostitute hook angle, but they didn't, because obviously they wanted to really try and stitch me up and entrap me massively to try and protect themselves from my intention of exposing them. So I did that, knowing their story, they would have to hand over. Mean that they direct opposite public circulation and into the police's hands. And they told me where to get them, who to get them from, and supplied the money to do it. So however you look at it, they engineered all areas of the supply chain.
Let me just jump in here for a moment. Sorry to cut you off, Jonathan. We're having occasional intermittent technical problems, it appears, with the sound card via this end of things, the laptop computer that we have. We have a network of two computers running together here in tandem, but it's either the sound card or the headphones themselves that we're using. And just the other day, I did head out and pick up a new set of headphones and wireless keyboard and mouse as well. But from time to time, you're cutting out, unfortunately, not in a big way, but not yet, knock wood. But this is a problem that did first emerge just a couple of weeks ago, and it's becoming more of an issue. So we're definitely going to have to look into this. But just continue then, if you would. I mean, this is a huge. This is, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, the movie with Steve Martin and Sir Michael Caine. You must be familiar, at least with the title, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Have you watched the movie?
Many moons ago, yeah.
We just had it on here last night, believe it or not, and for no particular reason other than I was looking for something I thought the wife would find entertaining, and perhaps provide some material for her and myself to reflect upon, get a good laugh, as well as, just hopefully see the wider artistic value and whatnot. But your story is itself, has any documentary been put together yet? You've been freed.
Well,
you've been cleared of all charges
bizarrely.
years ago, correct? You've been cleared for years. This is kind of as amazing as it is. This all kind of resolved itself about what, 10 years ago now, I think, or 7.
No, it didn't.
5.
I tried to get my convictions overturned because
Right.
I ended up getting convictions, you see, for delivering the coins. Because they did not afford me what they call journalistic license, although
Right.
they did afford journalistic license to the fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood for buying them.
Jeez, that's crazy. That's a total double standard, obviously.
Well, it becomes clear why this may have happened when you bear in mind we jumped forward a bit. So I ended up with two convictions for delivery of counterfeit coins. I got given 6 months in prison, and I've been trying to clear my name ever since. And that's getting much closer because it's now with the Criminal Cases Review Commission. And I've got last year, in the past 12 months alone, so many witness statements from people who've come forward with evidence in my favour, showing that what was done to me is so practically identical to what his modus operandi was with numerous other victims.
Jeez. Just like Epstein, it's shades of Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, as you're saying, modus operandi, and you've put together this great documentary, which we've got to recommend to all of our listeners. Extreme Hypnosis, Extreme Danger, or do I have that? Is my dyslexia?
Very nearly. It's Extreme Danger, Extreme Hypnosis,
right.
Subtitled "It's Time for the Sleepwalking Zombies to Wake Up." And it does cover kind of an overview of the whole fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood and Rupert Murdoch, the media moguls.
Sure.
Involvement in my life, but also involvement in world politics.
Of course.
And brainwashing the world. And believe it or not, it gets even more bizarre sounding. Because you mentioned documentary, but this weekend it's just come out in the Daily Mirror newspaper and the Sunday People paper here in England that Amazon Prime are working on a 3-part feature documentary on the rise and fall of the King of Sting, the fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood.
Oh, boy.
So it'd be interesting to see what comes out in that, especially given that last year, I believe it was, the Daniel Morgan murder inquiry panel. Now, for those who don't know, if you Google the Daniel Morgan murder, it's the most investigated murder in British history that hasn't been solved. So the most investigated, unsolved British murder in British history.
Including, or maybe the term is notwithstanding Jack the Ripper.
Well, he was a serial killer. This is a particular one person.
Okay.
You
Speaking, and this is a little off topic, but more maybe a little to the point in some ways, as far as suppression of justice is concerned, obstruction of justice as well. And I know you talk a lot about the Freemasons and various other secret societies, fraternal orders, and the like. And this is something which has come out in the UK, where, and I'm sure you'll probably be aware of this, that they, and I think this is great. It should be done all around the world, where there's transparency in a completely above board manner, where if you're running for any form of public office whatsoever, whether it's a judge or a elected public official, police, military, I mean, you name it, that you are required to openly declare your either affiliation or membership with the likes of the Masons and other secret or fraternal orders. This was brought forward and became an issue in the UK a number of years ago. I don't know if you're probably aware, and this is all within the context, I believe, on the heels of what turned out to be a lot of Masonic pedophiles being caught up.
The suggestions of such, yeah. But I mean, essentially, you're right. There's been calls that people should declare that, and it would make sense politically. Also, the same with the police. And it's interesting that if people do look into the Daniel Morgan murder inquiry report, that in that report, they conclude that one of the main reasons it remains unsolved, they did believe they'd found who did it at one point, but the case fell apart. And the report shows that that was down to ultimately a bundled job by, they state, the elements of the police and the corruption. The police helped cover it up.
Right.
The suggestions that maybe Daniel Morgan and his private investigations agency had become aware of, illegal activities involving the police, some members of the police, and he was silenced. But nonetheless, whatever the true motive was, the independent report showed without a doubt that there was errors with the way the police dealt with it and suggestions of corruption. And in the past few weeks, the Met Police, the London Met Police, New Scotland Yard, have been put into what they call special measures for the first time, as far as I'm aware, in history, because of the numerous allegations and instances that have been illustrated of incompetence, errors, and/or allegations of direct corruption. And on a big, big scale, you see, Mazher Mahmood, the fake sheikh, came into this because he boasted at one time of having bent police officers in his pocket during a thing called the Leveson Inquiry in England that was supposed to examine the corrupt links between the police and the media and other high-ranking officials. It looked at it briefly in part one, and then part two of the Leveson Inquiry got cancelled by the Conservative British government, who conveniently got into power thanks to propaganda and social engineering through largely Rupert Murdoch's media outlets. Rupert Murdoch being the person who formally employed the fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood. You see how it all kind of links together as a sordid jigsaw. And
it's all the big club, and you're not in it. You and I are not in the big club, as George Carlin told us. So how about, let me just draw your attention and remind you of the reporter Jill Dando, I believe her name was.
She was assassinated.
Well, and another high-profile murder, which I don't know if that would, if that would, in your mind at least, coincide, or in some ways
all these things kind of interlink in a strange way. You know, there was talk that Jill Dando may have been, key thing may have been, because there's no evidence 100%, but may have been assassinated to silence her, because there were suggestions that maybe she was going to blow the whistle at the BBC because she'd become aware of the antics of people like serial paedophile and child abuser, well, not just kids, also disabled adults, and just one sick individual.
Jimmy Savile.
Exactly, Jimmy Savile. And the suggestions that rather than him ending up getting exposed much, much earlier, that her assassination could have had some involvement in that. And it does make you wonder, because maybe they don't find out for certain the things that you would expect them to find out, because spanners are thrown into the work. And I refer back to the Daniel Morgan murder inquiry, because when that was being investigated for maybe the second time or the third time, I forget, but people can soon find out by following the links on my site, circusofthemind.net. One of the chief investigating officers, and is, I can't remember if she was wife at the time or ex-wife, the details are on the web links. The point is that a certain journalist's team started surveying these people, and God knows for what particular motive, but it was concluded in the Daniel Morgan murder inquiry report that their involvement was most likely to in some way interfere with the investigation to steer people off track. And guess whose investigation team that was? Yep, the fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood, operating for Rupert Murdoch's News of the World. So it's like a massive spider web where the bits of the web, as it gets bigger and further out, everything seems to interconnect, however remotely.
Right.
And all the commonalities are covering up and distracting from the truth of massive corruption and the source of real crimes over many, many years in terms of, you know, victims of the fake Sheikh. It's over a couple of decades. But in terms of other things, the media have covered up so many things over the years. You know, they've used it as well to help control and manipulate in politics. You've only got to look at the history of British politics over the past, well, ever since Rupert Murdoch owned British media institutions, yeah?
Sure.
And without fail, whoever is media institutions were pushing for and supporting as the next leader of whatever political party. Without fail, he has always managed to back the winning horse. Why is that? Well, it's because only a handful of people in the world, like half a dozen or so, between them own about 95% of all the mainstream media, television and radio stations, newspapers and magazines, and even these days, internet websites. So they can control the narrative and the message that's given out to the mass populace.
That's right.
And direct the way the mass populace think, which is quite damn scary when you think about it.
Well, I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but the word government, if you look at the Latin translation, literally breaks down as mind control, gubernmente.
Indeed.
To control the mind. I'm trying to come up with Ghislaine Maxwell's, her father.
Oh, yeah, sorry, thanks for reminding me. And here's a bizarre link. Mazher Mahmood, the fake Sheikh, the dishonest serial liar, the guy I can prove. Well, I've got a statement from someone who worked with him witnessing him drugging people in the course of stories to make them more compliant. There's evidence that he hacked multiple people's phones, that he used unlawful information gathering, that he edited evidence to make people look guilty of things they'd never done or to make it look like they'd said things they'd never said. That person, well, he is the person who obtained the infamous photograph, him and his team, because they happened to be in America at the time, the infamous photo of Prince Andrew meeting with Epstein in, was it Central Park? You know that time when he's apparently gone to stop at his house for several days in order to tell him that he no longer wants to be associated with him?
Correct,
The team that got that photograph was Mazher Mahmood's team, who happened to be in the area at the time. And when Ghislaine and Epstein, when the proverbial hit the fan, so to speak, certainly in the British media at least, when photographs started appearing of when Prince Andrew met with Epstein in Central Park, or whichever park it was, you'll notice that it was Mazher Mahmood who supplied them with the photograph. You're not telling me that someone who's supposed to be such a good chief's investigations officer, who took that photograph, so therefore knew the worth of it and the context of it, didn't at some point do some sort of investigation on Epstein with a view to doing a story, or at the very least getting compromat material they could use for blackmail purposes?
Oh no, that's absolutely the reason it was done, of course. So, and I'm not sure if you're aware of this or not, but apparently now all of the digital evidence that was collected throughout the years via Epstein, Maxwell, and the whole operation, the rest of the people that were involved in that, it's all disappeared according to the FBI. They can't find it. They've lost it.
How convenient.
Yeah. So it's like, gee, it's kind of like the way
a lot of people owe them favors.
Man, I tell you, and it really, I think, leads to a major crisis in legitimacy and trust in the integrity of these institutions is very much in question, obviously. And
I don't think it is in question. Well, certainly not when it comes to a large number of the British media print outlets run by Rupert Murdoch. I don't think that they're in question at all. And I think the same, looking at, you see stuff on social media outlets and the way people talk about Murdoch's media outlets and approach around the world seems to indicate it's highly likely it's the same, not just in England, but in Australia or America and loads of other places. And I don't think it's in question because from my first-hand experience, I can tell you going back as far as the early 90s up till literally a few years ago from my own first-hand experience, that they don't care. Truth, honesty, and reality is the least of their priorities.
Right.
Viewing figures, listening figures, or selling copies and getting readers is their bigger priority, and also serving whoever controls them behind the scenes. Sounds a bit conspiracy theory, but whoever gives them favours, they may owe favours too. They keep certain stories are kept out of the press conveniently. This I know for a fact because briefly I worked as an undercover journalist, and some information on certain things that I sold to a certain, supplied, didn't sell because they never made the light of day, to a certain Murdoch publication, were locked into a safe or disposed of. They never saw the light of day. And yet, years later, the individual that evidence concerned, namely Rolf Harris, was exposed as being a child abuser.
Was that the story that you put together? It was covering Rolf.
I supplied information that had been passed to me.
Right.
I acted as an intermediary to pass on information that would have seemed to indicate that such was the case.
Sure.
Except that was in 1990, around 1996 off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it wasn't until many years later that it became public knowledge and that Rolf Harris was done for such despicable, sick activities.
Hey, I got a quick question.
So they definitely cover things up, and they also fabricate and make things up. There's full evidence on circusofthemind.net that Rupert Murdoch's fake Sheikh Mazher Mahmood, that the police and the Crown Prosecution Service knew without any doubt whatsoever as far back as 1994. And bear in mind that the Talisa Kontos-Stavlos case that disgraced him in the end and got him jailed for his activities didn't happen until 2014. But they knew back in 1994 that he could not be trusted as a witness of truth. And there were communications between the police and CPS considering if they should take further action or investigate him further, but basically saying he shouldn't be trusted.
Yep.
This was never disclosed to me or any of the other Mazher Mahmood victims at any time, not even to this day. So from 1994, 2014, 2020, 18 years. Is that the right maths? 94, 2004, 214, 222 is 28 years, isn't it? later from 1994. They had numerous opportunities, the police and the Crown Prosecution Service, to disclose that information and other information, such as the fact that the footballer David Beckham and his wife, former Spice Girl Victoria Beckham, that on the 3rd of November 2002, the story that apparently a team were going to kidnap their child and that the News of the World apparently stopped it. Well, as time now shows us, someone involved in that who got a prison sentence had that conviction overturned through the Criminal Cases Review Commission, and the evidence seems to illustrate that this was all fabricated and engineered to occur by Mahmood, his team and his associates. But that was never disclosed to us. It was never disclosed to us that another case where apparently a team of people were trying to sell red mercury, well, it was never disclosed to us that there is no such thing as red mercury. And again, the evidence seems to point that it was all engineered and fabricated by Mahmood and his team. It was never disclosed to me or any of the victims that numerous court cases over the years, both before my case in the story was 98, but the legal case was 99. Both before my case and after, numerous cases collapsed because they decided they could not rely on the truth or validity of Mazher Mahmood's evidence. Why was that never disclosed to us so that we could appeal our cases sooner or told to us in advance of our trials, as is supposed to be the duty of the police and the CPS? They have a duty to disclose things that may be relevant to the credibility of any witnesses. Mahmood was the sole witness in most all of the fake shape related court cases. In people like world heavyweight champion boxer Herbie Hydes, Grange Hill and London's burning actor John Elford, and a whole bunch of other people, including, of course, Talisa trial that collapsed. Mahmood was the chief witness, and there was stuff going back to 1994 showing that he could not be trusted, but they covered it up. And not only did they cover it up and not disclose it to us, but they also carried on letting cases involving him go to court without properly stress testing his evidence.
What kind of defense have you had to this point, Jonathan? Have you been representing yourself, or have you been racking up a considerable amount of lawyers' bills?
I was representing myself, and I'm very fortunately, fast approaching 2 years ago now, I reached out to a UK charity called Advocate, the Bar Pro Bono charity.
Right.
And they put a call out, was there any barrister out there who would be prepared to represent me pro bono for free? And very kindly, a gentleman called Mr. James Manning from Nexus Chambers in London agreed to and did a wonderful job of taking my layperson's handwritten grounds of appeals and formulating them with the correct legalese, the correct wording, the correct layout, and all the other stuff that normally cost you a small fortune to get done. He very kindly did that for me. And the truth is that everything was ready so that in January this year, on the 21st of January, I could appear at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, which I did, as explained on circusofthemind.net. Armed with a bundle of 2,064 pages of witness statements and supporting evidence, including, I repeat again, proof that I was drugged, which, had that been known at the time of trial, would have had it thrown out of court as an abuse of process. Proof that my phone was hacked and unlawful information gathering was used, which again would have had it thrown out of court. Proof that Mahmood's long-term activities involved editing tapes and evidence to make it look like people had said or done things they hadn't, which occurred in my case as well, and a whole bunch of other proof and evidence that basically you look at and you just go, this should never have gone to court, including, of course, the fact there was massive non-disclosure on the part of the police and CPS that I've just mentioned. So I had to apply for permission to appeal out of time, because obviously my court case took place in 1999. So we were like 24 years on nearly. And I also needed to apply for permission to vary my grounds of appeal because of all the new evidence I'd got in 2021. Well, lo and behold, they didn't give me permission to appeal out of time, and they didn't give me permission to vary my grounds of appeal because they said it was 24 odd years later, and the fact that I knew who Mahmood was and that I'd gone in with the intention of exposing him meant I wasn't, in their opinion, entrapped. So now I've submitted it all to the Criminal Cases Review Commission. They've confirmed they've got it, as people can see on circusofthemind.net, and we await them looking at it because they have the power to send it back to the Court of Appeal and say, actually, if you look at all the evidence, you'll see that although he thought he'd engineered all this, it actually turns out they were one step ahead of him, that his publicist was involved, that he was manipulated from way before he ever thought that he'd engineered it, and he was socially engineered and entrapped into it long before he ever became aware of it at a conscious level. Because the evidence now shows that they always knew what I was up to and that they actually screwed me over big style. So now we wait for the CCRC, both for myself and hopefully then that will help other victims of Mahmood to be able to come forward and say, well, the same happened to me. The stuff that's on circusofthemind.net, the evidence that's there, well, that applies to me as well. So that hopefully other people who were manipulated into doing things they would never normally have done, or actually didn't do the things they were accused of because it was twisted and evidence edited and such not, can clear their names finally. And at the same time, as a knock-on effect, also help wake up the general public around the world to how corrupt some elements, not all, but some elements of the mainstream media have been for many, many, many years.
Well, that's one of the first things that we learned in journalism school, or at least the electives that I took back in university, media studies and the like, is that media, the institution of media and all various levels, one of the key functions that they play is that of the gatekeepers. They set the agenda, they establish the parameters of discourse, what is otherwise known as the Overton window, and they there's a great deal of filter and spin that is not just inescapable, but all too often they overly exploit and make the most use of in order to convey their version of the events, not just an objective straight up hard news story, who, what, where, when, why, and how, but a little too much in the way of editorializing taking place. We are speaking, by the way, for those of you out there, to Jonathan Royle, a British hypnotist and mind control expert, known internationally as the author, presenter of the documentary Extreme Danger, Extreme Hypnosis. Yes, you can find it on YouTube. It runs for a little under 2 hours. He's also written several books on hypnotism, self-help, and various other related subjects, available from all major bookstores. We don't have much time here, of course. You've got other obligations to attend to briefly.
One thing I should mention to everyone then is, because all what I've said is part of that big spider web, but it works worldwide. What I'm saying happened to me and various Mahmood victims here in England and other places in the world, because some of these victims were from other places, as people will find when they look into it a bit more, is that be very careful. Don't automatically trust anything you see in the media. In fact, research Project Mockingbird. Now, according to CIA declassified documents, Project Mockingbird was closed down decades ago. But you see, if you wanted such a project to be truly effective, namely one whose aim was to control and manipulate the media to be able to control and manipulate the public, surely it would be better if that it looked like it had actually been shut down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And therefore, I would argue that in some ways, on some level, the real powerful people in the world, if they want to keep something out of the media, there are ways they can do. Or if it's inevitable that, because we now have more and more independent media and things can leak out through more independent channels, thank God, if they know that it's eventually going to get out and go viral, they will do damage limitation and release it and force other mainstream media outlets to release the story, but in a manner where they uniformly say pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
You notice how world media all at the same time started, all their politicians all around the world were saying, like, build back better.
Yeah, well, of course, that's right, yeah. Yeah.
A narrative goes worldwide and they feed it out in the way that they've been instructed to. That's not journalism.
Yeah.
That's repeating a message you've been sent.
Yeah, no, it's pretty just sad and pathetic, obviously, and that's what makes us here in the Fifth Estate, the digital underground, something of a threat for a number of reasons. One of which is that we make the mainstream look pretty stupid, obviously, and corrupt when we've been talking about a lot of these issues for so many years, and they just simply refuse to acknowledge them. Top of the list being the likes of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Of course, the whole business with the Hollywood mogul, another not so very nice Jewish man, unfortunately, who's
something Stein.
Goldstein or
Harvey Weinstein or something.
Yeah, I mean it is deep, Jonathan, and then wide as well too, with the interlocking, the network globally as it is a criminal network. Ultimately, although I guess if you're the ones who are not only writing the laws but then ruling on the various, essentially the cases themselves, rendering judgment, then, it's conflict of interest is one of the big things that we just did not hear anything about hardly at all within the last 2 years.
Could not agree more, because, some might suggest, I'm not saying that I'm suggesting it, but some might suggest a good reason for not allowing me on the 21st of January 2022 in the Courts of Appeal to have an extension of time to make my appeal or to vary my grounds was due to the nature of what they saw in my evidence bundle and the statements and the stuff that it would bring out into the public domain, which would then bring into question every other Mazher Mahmood related conviction that every other Mahmood victim has ever received, and would also make the public acutely aware of the fact that routinely he was hacking people's phones, using unlawful information gathering techniques, drugging people, fabricating evidence, manipulating things, and it would start to wake up the public to the fact that things are not as they appear, and that it'd have them asking questions as well, such as, did the police and the Crown Prosecution Service cover these things up over the years? Was it incompetence that they didn't disclose to all the victims what they knew as far back as 1994? Or was there a more sinister undertone? Well, we know that there appeared to be a more sinister undertone with the events surrounding the Daniel Morgan murder, based on what's been published in the Daniel Morgan Murder Inquiry Report, where Mahmood's name is mentioned several times in that document. So, that's the message. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. Look into it. Look at circusofthemind.net. That's my personal first-hand story, but there's evidence there about loads of other Mahmood victims, and it's the bigger picture of how it spreads out over that spider's web into dishonesty, corruption, manipulation in other areas of the media. Because, as is clear in England at least, and I'm sure it's happening more and more around the world, if it hasn't done yet, it will do, I'm sure, at some point, and I can't see it being just isolated in England. But it's not just Mazher Mahmood who hacked people's phones. Hell no. tons of people had their phones hacked over the years, and the News of the World's had to pay out money, and it closed down over the Millie Dowler affair, as mentioned earlier. Mirror Group newspapers, paid people out for the same thing. And there's accusations out there that, it was just commonplace in the media to use whatever means it took to get a story, however dishonest, unethical, or illegal they may have been.
The ends justify the means. Way Out Waldo, David Charles. Who else are we looking at here? Just Mech. We have Freedom for Alberta as well. And a whole number of other great, very colorful characters join us via the chat end of things, the peanut gallery, as we so often refer to it. Thomas Santo Pascal via Facebook, and so on and so forth. A lot of folks who've yet to log in.
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to dash, Jay.
That's right. Yeah. Well, it's too bad we never had a chance to get you on camera either. I was going to add, we didn't, because it was such a rushed ordeal from the get-go. It would have been nice to have you on camera if you were so inclined. That's one of the features.
Maybe we can do that next time. If you could do me a favor, send me, inbox me a link, ideally via Facebook if possible, to where the replay will be, and then I'll share this far and wide.
That's right. Yeah, the archive content, no problem. Speaking of which, your YouTube channel, you've been doing a lot of great work over there and really busy as of late, it appears, with all kinds of interviews.
Yeah, it's a thing called Hypnosis Week, hypnosisweek.com. If anyone's interested in hypnotherapy and how it can improve their life, or it can be used for entertainment purposes, but along the way, we've also looked at the deeper subjects of how it can be used for by people with nefarious intent, such as government, the media and whatnot, to brainwash, manipulate and control people. And all those interviews are there to watch in a folder called Hypnosis Week on my Celebrity Hypnotist YouTube channel, completely free of charge, of course.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. We know you've got to run, but
thank you for having me. And next time we'll get on camera.
Let's do this again. Hopefully before another 2 years manages to pass us by. Yeah. So, all right then. Very much appreciated. We got all your social media links here, of course, and we will send you those archived URLs as
thank you, and then I will plug it out everywhere. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and take care.
Okay, happy sailing. There we go. Jonathan Royle, UK hypnotist and mind control expert, best known internationally as the author-presenter of the documentary Extreme Danger, Extreme Hypnosis. He's also written several dozen books on hypnosis, self-help, and various other related subjects, available from all major bookstores. It would be great to talk to him and see if we could maybe set up a bit of a deal, if possible. This isn't always an option, unfortunately, with the way authors do business and sell their books. But on occasion, we are able to have discounts, discount deals basically in place and established, depending on where things stand with respect to how their content and material is published. So this is just an incredible story, the fake shake, and a lot of really underhanded, nefarious activities taking place in conjunction with Rupert Murdoch. And I think News of the Day was one of the outlets that he mentioned. Rupert Murdoch is a well-known media mogul, of course. A lot of tabloid type endeavors or publications that he oversees. So this is something that we would encourage all of our listeners out there to look into a little further. Get back to us with any information that you are able to come up with as far as Jonathan's role in things is concerned, how he was targeted, how he... It's so interesting too that, as stated earlier, the wife and I were watching Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Steve Martin, and I think he's been knighted by the Queen, Sir Michael Caine, just the other night. It's really quite reminiscent of that movie in many ways. So, a fascinating individual. Someone who, at various points of his career, has been referred to as the bad boy of British hypnotism. Had a bit of a run-in with the UK's Magic Circle. We didn't get a chance to get into it in any great detail this go-around, unfortunately. A lot of people out there listening might not know, although I think Way Out Waldo would be quite interested in hearing about how Jonathan was pretty much raised in the circus culture and environment from the time he was just a child, and trained professionally to be a clown. Something I'd like to actually talk to him more about when we get a chance to reconnect, his family's past. I'm not sure if he himself has any gypsy blood in his veins or not. It wouldn't surprise me if that were the case. Very fascinating and intriguing character. So, in fact, we have some AV material